at the end of 2007, when the Sheldon Jackson College had decided that they needed to close their doors, winter was coming on, and the heat and light had been turned off to the Stratton Library, and there was a lot of public concern. The college contacted the state library and asked us for some assistance. So we started being involved with the collections. This collection was in the Special Collections Room. It's the C.L. Andrews book collection, very dear to the people of Sitka. We had a project of wrapping and housing all of these because it seemed clear they needed to be taken out of the building as soon as possible. We inventoried, boxed the entire collection. Since this time, the college made an agreement with the Kettleson Library. All of the C.L. Andrews book collection is now the property of the Kettleson Library. It's stored like this out at the Sawmill Creek at the city facility out there. It's all safe. The Kettleson Library is making their plans to be able to provide public access to it. Another important part of the material that was in the library at the time is the college archives. These archives have been organized by Evelyn Bonner and Nancy Ricketts over the years, very beautifully organized. There is a quite complete guide to the collection that's available online. There is a lot of really vital information in this collection. We've moved the collection, which now actually is the property of the state of Alaska, so it belongs to all of us. And the archives collection is in Juneau at the moment. Our hope is that it'll be moved back over, and I'll speak more of that in a few minutes. We again organized, cataloged all of this, got it ready to move to Juneau. There's a guide to it that's available online. There's a lot of photographs in this collection that go back through the entire history of the college. There's some really significant portions of this. There's a William Paul collection that they're mostly copies, his research files throughout his career. There are language teaching materials, audiovisual materials that, since I've been responsible for it, we've been trying to make digital copies, and those are available to the public. A.P. Johnson had a series of lectures on Tlingit culture that are all part of that. There are Tlingit language camps over the years. A lot of the audio materials go back quite a ways. This is a kind of significant item in the collection. It's a very large, the original plat of the Sheldon Jackson training school. This is the core campus right down in here, and the whole lay of the land. It's kind of a marvelous document. There are lots of these kinds of documents. The college, of course, and the history of the Presbyterian Church are all tied up together. The history of the AMB is a lot of materials about that in this collection, and of course the history of the school as a training school. That collection also includes quite a number of photographs by Elbridge Merrill. And I should mention the college owned a large collection of the Merrill original glass plates. The National Park owns some portion, and all of them are now, I see that Sue Thorson just came in the room. They're under her care on a temporary agreement, and I don't think the final disposition of those has been decided. But I can tell you that they're safe. The Stratton Library was purchased by the state of Alaska. It's now a part of the Division of Libraries, Archives, and Museums. It's adjacent to the Sheldon Jackson Museum, and it really requires some extensive renovation. We have a budget right now of $900,000. It's going to take a period of 2 possibly 3 years before we're ready to start having programming in the library. But our ambition is to move all of the college archives back into the library here and make them available in Sitka. There actually is another large body of archival material that was collected from around the campus at the time that the college was closing down. And last summer, Sarah Bornstein, working on a grant through the state archives, went over and created an inventory of those records. They've just been sorted. They need a lot of work. They're actually in the Stratton now. They're not available to the public, although there is a guide to them. Yeah, I think those are the main things that I wanted to cover. And there is an advisory committee of people from Sitka who are interested in the heritage of Sheldon Jackson College. They'll continue to be involved as we find ways to provide access to the collection and ways to carry out programming in the library. One thing that I am really interested in is developing a collection development policy so we can continue to add to the Sheldon Jackson College archives. Peter Metcalf has become responsible for the Andy Hope papers, which is an extensive group of papers. He's working on them now. The State Library is helping in some small ways. And our hope is that all of those papers, once they're organized, will become a part of the Sheldon Jackson archives. We find that appropriate. And we need really input from the community on that and the other collection management decisions that we need to make. Are there any other questions about the college archives? Yes, Nancy. And Nancy, may I hand you this mic? Please.
Excuse me, I'm Nancy Davis, and I missed part of your presentation. You showed a picture of the Andrews collection, and you commented that you have it in Juneau. I understood that it was out at Sawmill Cove. Could you explain how the Andrew collection left Sitka?
No, it did. The C.L. Andrews book collection
Yes.
is very definitely out of Sawmill Cove.
Okay,
Yes.
You showed a picture, and you were talking as if it were in Juneau.
No.
I missed that then.
Okay.
Another question, I've heard again and again that there's a local committee who has made all these decisions and is in the process of making the decisions, and I've never seen a list of who's on that committee in the selection process. Those are my two questions. Thank you.
I can provide you with Nancy, and I think actually that I believe it is. I think that has been publicized. And indeed, if it would be helpful, I think we can do a public service release of. In fact, I think it would be very timely at this point to do an update and have something published here at Sitka.
Maybe some of those it would be nice to have that public rather than just the committee has made these decisions and who are they and on what criteria. I know that Nancy Henrikson.
Yes, she is, and I'm sorry that she couldn't be here today, but I'll certainly do that, Nancy, and thank you for that. Okay, so thank you very much, and let me introduce Sergei Kant. Get you up here, Sergei. Did you put this on?
Okay. That's a microphone?
It's for the capture.
Okay. What do you do with this?
Just put it in the pocket. Lights off? Yeah, I think that's okay. Lights off back and forth.
And if anyone has questions, I'll leave this mic right here, and if you could talk into it, that way we'll get your questions.
The collection of Sitka, is that what's wrong?
No, but I think we had misunderstood.
Okay. All right. I see a lot of familiar faces, and a few folks probably don't know who I am. So I'm Sergei Khan. I teach anthropology and Native American studies at Dartmouth College, but this community, this town, has been part of my life since 1979, when I came to do research on Tlingit history and culture, which resulted in a dissertation and several books, about 20 articles and book chapters on Tlingit history and culture. This project is a little different. It's a book coming out with the University of Oklahoma Press. It's already in production, so in about a year, maybe less. Collection of photographs by Vincent Soboleff that is housed in Alaska State historical collection of the Alaska State Library that Jim is the head of. And so to begin with, I want to thank him, but he's not here. This is a collection that some of you know, at least some of the photographs are familiar. The Tlingit folks know they picked beautiful pictures of Tlingit people. All the pictures deal, or majority of the pictures deal with Angoon and the neighboring community of Killisnoo. So the pictures of Tlingit people wearing regalia at U are familiar, but there's a huge part of the collection that is rarely looked at, and my book will be much more comprehensive, and I'll talk more about that. So the book will have a narrative part describing the life of Vincent Soboleff and his family, also the life of the Killisnoo, which was basically a fish processing factory making guano. So it had a really strong smell. Also a variety of other commercial activities on the island by people familiar to Sitkans who at least know the history, by people like de Groff, Vanderbilt, a number of others. And that factory drew, as part of its labor force, the neighboring community of Angoon, which was all Tlingit people. So those two communities are featured in the collection. It has a few photographs of Juneau and Sitka, but those are kind of run-of-the-mill photographs that we will not feature in the book. It's a large collection, so we can't show everything. How does this work? Okay, that's the red. So you move the slides by pushing on the computer or pushing this thing? Yeah, I'm not sure. I want to thank a number of people, and I want to do it from the start, not at the end. In terms of the collection, of course, is housed in the, I said, in the historical collection, and Gladys help, and now Jim, the heads of the collection, and their entire staff have been incredibly helpful providing access. So since 2006, I've worked on this project, both sitting in Juneau in their wonderful facilities, but also by email. Without their help, I really could not have done this. In terms of identifying the Tlingit people, the Tlingit houses, and the Tlingit At'u, I owe a huge, huge gunachish to my nephew through adoption, my brother's son, Harold Jacobs. Good Shai. Thank you, Harold. Also, a lot of other folks from Angoon. And Marina Miller, who lives here in town, for sharing with me a photograph of actually her dad, who she's Panamarkov, her maiden name. And John Panamarkov was a boy. His father probably worked in Killisnoo. There are a number of Russians who worked there too. And I'm very interested in that community. That's my new project, the history of the Russian community after the sale of Alaska to Americans. And in that photograph, for the first time, I got to see what Joseph Zubov, the Russian gentleman who worked on the island, looked like. And Zubov's very important, not only for the history of the Killisnoo, but because his last name is carried by a whole slew of people from Angoon, and including Joey Zubov, the head of the Raven House. I wish he were here, but that's his great-grandfather. Thea Brown and several other grandchildren of his. Dr. Walter Soboleff, who was the nephew of Vincent Soboleff, the photographer, I was lucky enough to interview him a few years before he passed away, just recently. And he gave me some very valuable information because he remembered those times. There are now very few people who remembered Killisnoo. It burned down in 1928, so you have to be pretty old to remember it. Mark Jacobs, Harold's dad, who was my very close friend, Tlingit teacher, and adopted me as his younger brother. I learned a lot about Angoon from him, and various other folks from Angoon. I just want to say, in terms of method, I think writing a book like that would not be possible for me without the previous work on Tlingit ethnography, culture, history. There is a book on Tlingit photography by Sharon Melch. You've probably seen it, published by Pennsylvania Museum. It's okay as a book, but Sharon really hasn't spent much time here. There's a chapter there on Merrill photographs. And I'm not trying to beat my own drum and tell you to buy my book and not Sharon's. But it's a very superficial book. There are a lot of mistakes in it. And she's trying to do too many things. So there are 5 or 6 chapters on various photographers who photographed Tlingit people. There's a lot of speculation on what might have gone through the minds of the photographers, and especially the Tlingits who were being photographed. I just think that she was a bit over her head, because this work, you know, every single photograph you have to know who the people are, what their names are. And so it's a very maybe tedious process for some, but I enjoyed it. Took a long time. So I'm just presenting you kind of the highlights. And there's some photographs out there from the collection. I also think they're beautiful photographs. And if you consider the fact that Vincent was not a professional, he was not a Merrill, he wasn't Curtis, he was just a boy who got a Kodak camera, a little Kodak camera that came out in the late 1890s from his parents, and kept taking pictures through 19-teens, 1920s. Then he became a businessman and really didn't have much time. So we're talking about that 30-year period. Most of the pictures are 1890s, 1910s. He also interests me because his father was Russian, came to Angoon, Killisnoo as a priest. I've written a book about the Russian church among the Tlingits, and I read Russian. That's my native language. So I had the history sort of done. I didn't need to revisit it. In my book on Tlingit Russian Orthodoxy, there's a whole chapter on Killisnoo and Angoon church history. And his mother was German, so he kind of blended these two cultures. And then his brother Sasha, or Alexander, his younger brother, married a Tlingit lady, and that's where Walter comes from. So, and his sisters married Americans. So you've got these American, Russian, Tlingit cultures coming together in this family. So the family is fascinating. So my book will have a bunch of photographs of the Soboleff family and of their house, what it looked like, and how they lived in Killisnoo. I think that's very interesting. So a little bit about Vincent, born in 82 and died in 1950. These are his parents, Reverend Ivan, or Father Ivan, and his mother, Olga. She had a Russian name, and I think her family was from part of Poland that was German, but there are some Slavic roots there as well. She aged very quickly when life in Killisnoo was hard, and she actually is not that old in this picture. But this is a wonderful picture inside their home in Killisnoo, where they tried to maintain a kind of Victorian, or at least middle-class lifestyle, in a place with no running water, no electricity. And I'll talk a little bit more about the interior and all the knickknacks they had. But here, this is Sasha, the younger brother, Walter's dad. This is Vincent. He's a teenager. And they're looking at Vincent's photograph. So he really loved photography. And we're fortunate that he did. This is Father John as a young man, or Father Ivan. And this is Olga as still unmarried lady. I found this photograph because This is, the previous photograph is the only thing you find among Vincent's photo. He photographed her photograph. But the real picture is this. This is a studio photograph taken in Anaheim, California, of all places, because the reason it's called Anaheim, it was the German community of people who first moved to San Francisco from Germany, but then didn't like it there, and they started Anaheim winemaking. And her father also had some business. Her brother owned a jewelry store in Anaheim. So thanks to internet, I just Googled Olga Soboleff. I mean, I had some idea about Anaheim. I forgot where I found it. And I think I just Googled Olga Soboleff, and this picture came up. And it's wonderful. And the people there were very gracious. And in their town library, they send me, the negative. And here she is, a beautiful young lady. So at some point, Vincent's dad was serving as an assistant priest in the San Francisco Cathedral, and they met. Okay, we'll come back to the Soboleff family. What I want to say is I'm not going to show a lot of pictures of Tlingit related directly to Tlingit culture because they're more familiar to a lot of people. I was hoping to have a bigger representation of Tlingit folks. But nonetheless, they're well known. They've been reproduced in a lot of Sea Alaska publication and Goon publications. So I call them kind of quintessential well-known photographs. And in the book, all the pictures dealing with the Tlingits will be featured, but there are only about 20 of them out of 300. And we're not going to publish all 300. We'll have about 150. I had to fight with my editor because the book is already it's not very expensive. I think they have a plan to do paperback and hardcover. But she had a limit of like 160, and I said, no, 180, and we kept going back and forth. Anyway, with Harold's help, I listed all the houses, but maybe Harold wants to just, I'm going to point to the houses, and Harold can say what they are, which clan they belong to. So from right to left, is it too small for you, or you? Okay, keep going. Okay. Next.
It's the
So this is
Lady
area. Next.
Killer Whale Chasing Seal House, or Killer Whale House. That's the schoolhouse. The next one is Wuchtakud and Keat Hit, the killer whales facing away from each other. Hoots Hit, the bear house belonging to the Take Lady.
Can you speak louder? Next.
Onchak Hit, that's the central house, or the Teach Hit, the dog salmon house from the Inadi clan.
Uh-huh.
Goon Hit, the freshwater spring house, Deshitan.
Next.
Tukka Hit, needlefish house, Deshitan.
Uh-huh.
Yes Hit, Raven House, Deshitan. Deshu Hit, end of the trail house, Deshitan.
It's a little house. I don't know if that may not be a
Got
house.
Khutskode Hit, Bear Nest House,
And the big one.
Wushkitan, and the big one is the new Hit, Fort House,
And there are a few
Wushkitan.
houses that are not in the picture. Thank you, Harold. This is a great, because we know approximately when this was taken, and you can compare it to later photographs. A very important picture. And so we know that Vincent went over to Angoon and took some pictures there. And he, because of his father's position as a priest who actually was fairly tolerant of native customs, he had a good rapport with the community. I imagine and I speculate the kids were accepted by the community. And we have some memoirs, a short memoir by one of the sisters. There were 2 boys and 2 girls, Nina, Vera, Sasha, and Vincent, or Vita. So his Russian name was Vitaly. So they interacted with local native folk. This is a very well-known picture. This is another picture that's reproduced. Oh, you want to
Sergei?
talk about that? Okay, I'm sorry.
This house was painted by a man named Cotland Dane. And Lydia George identified, there's 3 men standing there, right?
Yeah.
The one in the middle is John Nelson, the head of the house. His name was Ish. Lydia's father is on the right, Peter James, Kastech. The man on the right is Pete Hobson, Seen Ish.
Wait, right or left?
The man standing on the left
Okay,
is Pete Hobson.
okay.
This house, I used to visit the caretaker that lived in the house, and I remember in 1982 they were cleaning the house out, doing city cleaning, and I remember this woman hauling out a bunch of lumber from upstairs. It was scrap lumber, she said, and they burned it up, and it wasn't until about 5 years ago I realized what that lumber was. It was the painted house front they had stored upstairs. So that was just in 1982 that survived, and they lost that in the city cleanup.
Thank you. Incidentally, these the glass plates. He did glass plates from which they printed photographs. They were left in Vincent's house in Angoon. He later moved to Angoon, and then his nephew, Lloyd Kinky Bears, that was his nickname, son of Vera, he found them, and I believe that he provided these inscriptions. Some of them are fairly accurate, some are not. Some are really kind of dumb. He called tribal houses dance houses. He called the screen in the back of a Tlingit house with the opening a slave board. I mean, they're really inaccurate. So I'm trying to correct that. He knew some of the Tlingit people, or maybe he heard about them from Vincent, but some of them were erroneously identified. Sometimes we don't know the names, so I have to say a Tlingit person, a Tlingit woman, a man. This is a very well-known picture, and I wish we had the time to go over each person. In the book, I have identifications for many of them, so if Harold allows me, I'll just mention a couple. For example, this gentleman with the mustache, very handsome, that's Matthew Kukash. That's Albert Kukash, the grandfather of State Senator. This is the father of Vincent. And this is the bishop Innocenti, or Innocent, who visited the community. And we know when that happened, so this is 1905. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Walter Soboleff identified a lot of the people here, which includes, I think, his mom, a few other people. There are about 10 people that we know, including some, these are Russian boys. This is Cyril Zubov, the son of Joseph Zubov, grandfather of Joey Zubov, whom I'm going to talk about later. A Russian gentleman, Harlam P. Sokolov, a deacon in the Russian church. A Russian deacon from Sitka. Walter remembered his deep bass voice. Just a great picture. Tlingit kids. I love it. And they're all members of a church society. You can tell by the sashes. It's the same type of society that existed in St. Michael's Parish here. This is head of the Basket Bay group, Kaskedi, but I let Harold talk about that.
The man there is named Geet Wayne. They have it labeled as Chief Metlakatla. I don't know how that came about, but I heard that he was also a fluent speaker of Tsimshian. His wife standing next to him, her name was Sergei. She was my clan, Yanyedi. But the hat that Cyril's been using, if you've seen Cyril wearing the beaver hat, that's the same hat that's in this photo.
Cyril Jordan.
And the man on the right was another one that eventually had the beaver hat all the way to the right. That's Peter Dick. His name is Katina. And he's also one of the caretakers of the hat before Cyril.
And his name was also Kalkau, wasn't it? No? Okay. And this is the part of, if you know Angoon, it's, if you go the front street, then turn right. It's that sort of towards the inn. Yeah. So they all dressed up posing. And I think they trusted Vincent, so they posed for him. And I really dislike this argument that a lot of books on American Indian photography talk about Western photographers capturing the image of Native people, exploiting Native people. These were Native people who were proud of what they looked like, particularly with their regalia. They wanted to be photographed. Even when they had somebody lying in state, the deceased person, you know, if they were surrounded by their atu, the family gave permission. Nobody could photograph someone, I think, or very rarely, without permission. So to talk about Native people being exploited by the photographer, especially by a 20-year-old Russian boy, obviously he photographed him because they wanted to be photographed. I think that's important to keep in mind. Yeah. Yeah, and there are some pictures actually of, you know, some photographers were taking pictures on the sly and kind of spying on Native people, even in Alaska. But that I'm not sure. But more of, you know, taking somebody's picture and saying, oh, you know, this is like a dirty Indian. Or there are a couple of pictures in this collection that I'm not reprinting because I don't like them very much. Of somebody who's very old. It says 102-year-old Indian, no name, and the man, you know, has only one eye. So Vincent probably had a little bit of a kind of voyeuristic or maybe curiosity. So I don't think they belong in my book.
And they would throw a nickel in the dirt.
Yeah. But there.
She recalled that with me as a, you know, in later years regarded it as a crisis in her life, and it manifested itself in some very serious disorders.
Wow.
But I guess that was quite prevalent on the West Coast, where people would travel, and it was just tourists. They weren't professional photographers or anything like that.
The tourists who came here in Sitka, for example, or Angoon, because summertime tour boats could go and visit Kilsnu,
Yeah.
deep enough harbor. They said, oh, these Tlingits are shrewd. These ladies who sell baskets, for example, if you want to photograph them, they charge a lot of money for it. So they were actually smart. You know, they needed money. And for potlatches or for whatever, for food, they were charging money. So I don't know who was exploiting whom. You know, it's more complicated than all these, you know, post-colonial, postmodern social scientists, my colleagues.
I remember the street lined up with cardboard tables and white tablecloths over them, and moccasins and beaded things and so forth. And my grandmother was one of them.
Wonderful. I have some pictures of actually in Kilsnu, a man and a woman presenting their artifact. Thank you. Harold, do you want to say a little bit? I mean, I have this is information from you, so if you want to add, fine. This is Harold's father's atu, so it's important.
The man wearing the hat and holding the dagger, his name was Gushdehin. And photographs like this really play an important part in my job in repatriation, because this hat and dagger were sold in 1974, and this was part of the evidence we used to the ownership of the lineage that owns these items. These two objects are here today. They've been here throughout the conference. The man in front is Billy Johnson.
Billy Johnson.
His name was Ayesh, and the man standing on the left and is his older brother Billy Jones on Gushu. Their sister is on the right. Her name was Yiktusan, and the man in the back, his name was Shku Yesh.
composition, because the boy with the paddles, I mean, it looks great. I like it. This is an interesting picture because it's taken probably after the raising of this marble gravestone by the man in the picture, all Kagwantan from Sitka. We know some of them. This is Tlantich, headman, one of the headmen, Patty Parker, and several others. We really don't have enough time, and I have a lot more to show you. So they came to raise a gravestone for a woman from Angun who was married to a Kagwantan. So she must have been Deshitan, probably.
Her name was Kanikwek.
And I think it's written on the stone. Also, my recollection, this is right above Angun where there was a traditional cemetery. And when I lived there in 1980, I think it was still standing. I don't know, it's probably fallen down now. But it's a wonderful picture. That I don't know, why there are pictures of two men below. That I really don't know. Do you have any? No. Maybe members of her clan also? Maybe they died earlier or something. I use this picture in my class sometimes to tell students that if an archaeologist found this stone in the ground, they would say Tlingit culture had changed. They switched from, traditional grave wooden structures to stone, because it's made probably in Seattle, but they wouldn't see this, and this is all very traditional, but underneath those they probably were wearing contemporary modern clothing, or there's a gentleman here wearing Salvation Army cap. So it shows how complex Tlingit culture was and that it was capable of combining tradition and change. I mean, you can build a whole lecture just around this one photograph. This is a great picture of canoes on the Angun beach, and these prow figure and this probably, I don't know, it's a nail to or painted, but this one still exists. We saw it in 2004 potlatch here. So these Kagwantans came to Angun for a party, and we know there are a lot of marriages between Angun and Sitka of Kagwantan, Deshitan. Do you want to add anything? No. Okay. Arch house of Basket Bay or Kakwati people. Very nice picture. And see, it says Salmon Dance House. Unfortunately, we can't scratch out these inscriptions, but they also represent something of the fact that they didn't know what. Yeah.
That represents Basket Bay, where the river runs underground.
The image and the salmon. It's salmon, right?
I don't know where the salmon are now, but apparently the boards were turned inside, so the image is, you can make out the image on the inside of the house. So that's intact yet.
I try to look for little features, images that tell us a little bit about culture. There's a lamplight, a street light here, probably with oil that they burned, so there's some lights in the town. This is a very nice picture of Kitchnag, who was one of the headmen of one of the houses of the Deshitan. And I like it because here he's pictured with his wife and daughter, I think. Daughter's out of focus, but the wife is younger, very nicely dressed in a, American-style Western dress. But he's displaying his at-o. But then you can look at, he's got the latest in, lighting fixtures, and he's a wealthy man, very well known. Kilisno Jake was his other name. He liked to be photographed. There are lots of pictures of him by Vincent and others. This picture is not well known because the boys' faces are a little out of focus, but I decided to use it because it's interesting. The young boys, and they're wearing regalia that Harold identified. They're Deshitan regalia. We don't know the boys' names, but do you want to say something about the regalia?
The shirt on the right has a beaded frog on it because they found a white frog under one of their houses. The shirt. And then the next shirt is called Yayikte Wudekineyes, The raven flying out of the whale, one of the raven journey stories.
So,
And that's, he's wearing a raven headdress. They still have, I think they still have all those objects except for the chilkat blankets.
and this boy is wearing gangouche,
Yep.
bear ears. So at least we can speculate these are boys of significant rank. This is taken in Killisnoo, and unfortunately this computer doesn't give me my notes. But what I know, and this is all from Walter, that this was, I think it was Kitchnall's or Charlie Andenat's house, private house, not a clan house. And they're about to take a body to the cemetery, which was in Killisnoo. And Walter identified several of the people, but I can't see my notes. So
Use your pointer.
we've got Harold.
In the middle. Next one. Killisnoo Jake.
Killisnoo Jake, okay.
His name was Kitchnach. He had a sister named
He was the one we just saw with his wife and daughter.
Nechia Yodati, and she was the mother of the man next to him. That's his nephew, Charlie Ondana Ott. And Charlie Ondana Ott had a sister named Contu, who's the mother of the man next to him. Down. Next one. Jimmy Hansen. His name was Quatish.
Yeah, and Walter didn't mention Jimmy Henson, so look, he lived to be 100 and he didn't remember. I have to write some things down. I'm still learning. But Walter remembered this lady, and I think she may be the widow of the person who died. But what's interesting, these private homes in Killisnoo, and they only lived there part of the year because in the winter they moved back. When the factory shut down for the winter, they moved back to Angoon to the tribal houses, clan houses. But these were substantial buildings, especially for wealthy individuals like Killisnoo Jake. Eddie Jim had a big house, Charlie Andenat. And there are a couple of pictures I was going to show you where you can see that they're very big. This is Kitchnall wearing the same tunic that we just saw one of the boys, I think, wearing. But this is, I want to talk about this. Harlampi Sokolov was a Russian, actually Creole, that is probably Aleut Russian or Yupik Eskimo Russian. Family goes back to pre-1867. We know that he spoke Tlingit, so he grew up in Sitka, probably hung out with Tlingit boys. And he worked for the church, but there were complaints that he spent too much time partying and sometimes just hanging out with native people. And he would work for a while, and they kick him out for bad behavior, then hire him again because he was a good interpreter. They needed him. He eventually quit because he couldn't make enough to support his family. But the fact that Kitchnach is letting him wear this important piece of clan property suggests that he trusted him, that they were friends. And in fact, in Father Soboleff's diaries, he mentions that, you know, he serves in the church, but he also visits with Tlingits and, you know, kind of fraternizes with them too much. So I think he looks a little silly with a gun. Maybe he thought that he's posing in a parlor. And of course, the American flag in the back is interesting. Do you want to say something about the use of the American flag?
I didn't know that shirt that he's wearing on the right. That's called Kuchlidi Kutas, martintail shirt. The whole shirt is covered in martintails. And then the pattern, the design on the front is called Gishtach Hugudiyesh, raven diving in the kelp. Another raven journey story.
Does it still exist?
Yeah. Both of those are still in clan hands.
And these old flags, I mean, they're now sometimes owned by families and clans as kind of valuable property, right? Also, when Harlampi had issues with the church, he would criticize with his Tlingit friends. So he was kind of working against the church in a way. I think he's an interesting character. I mean, you could write probably an article about him. This is Kajakti, the head of Anhak Hit, Walter Soboleff's clan, dog salmon. Right? And there are two pictures of him, one standing outside the Soboleff house and one inside. So this is Soboleff's house, and he's posing. He clearly came over to have his picture taken. Why else? For what reason would he bring his chilkat blanket and his dog salmon headdress? I also like you to pay attention to the portraits of Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar, and the Empress Alexandra. So the family was very loyal, Russian. At least Father John was. Yeah.
Was he also one of the five policemen?
Yeah, he and Kilsner Jake.
His own uniform, probably.
Yeah. We also know from the record that the first to convert to Orthodoxy and kind of give their approval for the church to come in were Kilsner Jake from Deshitan and this gentleman, and then the third one was from the Eagle side, was the Albert Kukash. So once these men said, we want to have a church, and it's interesting, they said, Sitkans already have a Russian church, and we don't want to go there to pray, and we don't want to go to Juneau either, so we got to have our own church. And that's his uniform. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I'm pretty much done with At-U, but there are other things I'll try to run through so you have time. We don't know the name of this man, unfortunately, unless you recognize him. Okay, we'll have to write down. What I liked about this picture, this is clearly he's posing. He's not working. It's, he's selling his artifacts. He's dressed very neatly, so it's for tourists coming into Kilsnu. And he's really presenting this modern image, a handsome man with this paddle, small totem poles. Sam Davis, do you know what clan he was? Pushkitan. Had his picture taken inside his house with his At-U. I've seen a picture of this paddle with Merlin. Thank you. But he chose to be dressed as a, Westerner, a nice suit and vest. And this is, I love this picture. I think it's beautiful. And this lady's actually weaving, but again, she's got her wares. So summer selling of artifacts was, I think, an important source of income. And the Soboleffs, the women, the mother and the two daughters were involved in, I think, helping sell some of the artifacts. So at some point, Father Soboleff was criticizing, occasionally criticized the Tlingits for, it's turned green, is that bad? He criticized them for, doing too many traditional feasts. And one of the men said, "What are you talking about? Your wife is selling Tlingit artifacts that she buys from us and then she sells to the tourists." Of course, the family also had a hard time because there were, 4 children, then they adopted 2 or raised 2 native children. And his salary was very low, so there was an additional income for the Soboleff family. But the natives felt that if they are selling our stuff, so maybe there's nothing wrong with our culture. This is a very nice picture. It's been reproduced, but I really like it. She's selling berries, and I doubt that she's selling berries to other native people. She's probably selling it to white people, right?
Sergei, one thing I want to put in is this is clearly a copy. When it's out in the lobby, you'll be able to take a look and see there are pins to the wall, and it's
Oh, so it's not his.
It's not a Soboleff.
Thank you. See, I'm learning things as I talk.
I think it might be Merrill. I can find out.
Oh, it's working. Okay. That's good to know. This is a great picture. We don't know the man's Tlingit name unless Harold walked out, huh? He's done with the Tlingit. He's not interested in this. His name is Maxim, which is Russian, so he's probably his baptismal name. But what it shows that Tlingit men did pick berries, and Herman Kitka says that in the movie Time for Gathering. I think it's beautiful. It actually says crab apples, but I don't know, would you consider crab apples berries or apples?
I don't think they're crab apples.
That's what Kinky wrote. Anyways, And then there are different activities, because I'm interested in what can we learn about the culture of Tlingits, but also other people, Russian, American. So this is a group of Tlingit men and boys repairing a canoe in Chatham. It's going to go faster now. A Tlingit man fishing for salmon. What would you call that? What's gaffing? In Freshwater Bay. This is a great picture. And Vincent obviously took a lot of pictures of the kids. Native kids, and especially kids from his family. So his sisters, the younger one's Nina, the older one's Vera. The family also raised this girl who looks at least partly native, phenotypically. They call her Nelly Stepanov, so she must have been Creole. And I couldn't find her. I looked through all the genealogies. I kept looking. And then they also raised Cyril Zubov. So something must have happened. His father, Joseph Zubov, was recognized as his dad. He had a Tlingit mother, but for whatever reason, he was in the family and treated as a member of the family. And a lot of his pictures, I think he was the boy, you know, Sasha was already grown up, so Vincent kept taking pictures of the boy and the family. And then another boy whose identity we don't know. There were probably 5 or 6 Russian/Creole families living in Killisnoo, working there during the summer, and some of them brought their wives and children. Some really interesting images of native activities. So this is the native section of the Killisnoo village. It had what's called the white man's quarters and the native quarters. But what I liked about it, I wish we had a bigger image, but this woman sitting on top of storage or smokehouse? What would you say? Smokehouse. She's drying seaweed. This is a middle section of the village, and that's where, when I blew it up and I took it over to Walter's house, he said, this is Eddie Jim's house. I think this one was Charlie Ondernot. This was somebody's house, I can't remember right now, but it was used for Salvation Army meetings. A little bit up on the hill is the Russian church. So it's a pretty active community with, substantial permanent community, even though in the Tlingit cultural mind, Angoon is the home because that's where the clan houses are. And then the company buildings are to the left. This is just a nice picture of Killisnoo in the wintertime. But there are also folks living outside, probably a summer camp. That's the priest's house next to the church. It's their little world. This is Easter time. See how beautifully the church is decorated. And this is Harlumpy. Now he's not wearing Tlingit regalia anymore. But the little boy is most likely native. I mean, if you look closely, he looks very much like a Tlingit kid. This is a very interesting picture. It doesn't look so great here. It's a few of the pictures I use in the book are not from Soboleff because they're rare and they're important. This is a priest who preceded Father Soboleff, Chudnovsky. We have his description of Killisnoo and Angoon. The man, this is Killisnoo Jake, this is Kajakti. The rest are all shamans, medicine men. And Chudnovsky claims that he converted them to Christianity. And there is probably some truth because he collected a lot of shamans' artifact pieces. And they're all in the St. Petersburg Museum of Anthropology, which I visited last fall. And this photograph is from their collection. They don't have a lot of photographs, but this one is fascinating, and they're standing in front of the church. So you see all these connections. Russia. This is a terrific picture. This is Sasha Soboleff, Walter's father, his mother, Anna Hunter, and a woman we can't identify. But look at the ladies' outfits. Beautiful. Sasha died fairly young, and it's kind of a sad story. So we're now looking at some of the Soboleff's, Soboleff's family. Vera and Nina married brothers, the Bears brothers, who were fishermen, Irish, I think. But Vera had 6 kids, including, this is Kinky, who apparently was kind of colorful personality in Juneau. Nina didn't have kids, and something funny happened. Either she fell off the dock, or I don't know, but she drowned. Vera lived a long life. She wrote a memoir about Killisnoo, except she changed her name to Ivanov in the memoir, except it's clear who she is. So, the one interesting thing, I asked Walter about this. I said, did the Soboleffs, who were Tlingit, part Russian, and the Bears interact? And Walter, he was a diplomat, and he said, not much. So I think they really kind of wanted to be white. And I mean, they were white. And so they didn't interact much with the half Tlingit, half Russian part. This is Cyril Zubov. And he was a handsome kid, and I think there are lots of pictures of him playing, standing, playing with his adopted sisters, playing with Tlingit kids. I found letters of him also in your collection where he writes to a priest saying, I need my birth certificate. And my real father is Joseph Zubov, so he acknowledged his father, even though for some reason he was raised by this family. My impression is that the Russian Zubov, he was kind of an interesting personality, claimed to be an aristocrat, which I don't think he was. He was definitely a womanizer. Everybody says so in their notes. He had a Russian wife in Sitka. He had a native wife in Angun, and it's a sensitive subject, so I'm not going to go further into it. But at least with this young boy, the fatherhood was acknowledged. And he says in the letter, which was written in the 1920s, I was with my father in Seattle when he was very sick, and he shot himself or committed suicide. It was all over Seattle newspapers. It was in 1911 or something like that. And eventually, Cyril went on. He married a Tlingit woman, and so then the genealogy goes, properly. He was killer whale, so he married eventually a Deshitan, and that's how that line goes. But he eventually became the grand president of A&B. So. But this is a great picture, which you never see it because they don't wear in Tlingit regalia, and some folks probably would not be interested, but I love it because they're just playing. It says cooking, so they're playing as if they're cooking, and they're Tlingit boys. And this is, the one on the far left is Cyril. And Cyril is a Russian name, it's Kirill, so he kept it as his real name. Now he's older. And you could see it's got Tlingit features, but also Russian features.
What year is that about?
When he's a grand president? He died in the 60s, so this is probably 40s, 50s. I don't remember when he was. We can talk about tomorrow when we do A and B. Probably 50s. Now, this is a very important picture, at least for me. Maybe the Zubov family already knows it, but this is a very colorful bunch of guys who worked for the company. None of them are Tlingit. One's Chinese. Most of them are Anglo or Euro-American. But they have really funny names. Some are like One-Eyed Jim and Lame Jack. But this is Joseph Zubov. He's the only one wearing a tie. So, and I've never seen his picture. And this is little Johnny Panamarkov. And people, old-timers in Sitka remembered him. He was very involved in the Russian church. He was the choir director. And he died in the 60s. And he was single for a long time. Then he married a Tlingit lady. So Marina, and she has a sister. They are, Tlingit through their mother and Russian through their father. So when she showed me this photograph, she just said, "That's my dad." But then I turn it over, and it says Killisnoo, And I could date it because I saw church records of when John was born. And then he probably wrote down in his own hand, because he remembered the names of every single person on the picture. And he said Joseph Zuboff. And then there's another one. She has another one. So I was so excited. This happened 2 years ago. There were a few Russians or Creoles working. The Tlingits did mostly supplying fish for the factory. They didn't work in the factory itself, certainly not as engineers. This is a Russian gentleman, Stephen Chernov, and they were an important family in Sitka. Kind of a dandy. This is a great picture, I think. And the guy on the far left is Larionov. He also was supposed to be a church worker. But eventually, he did some drinking. I guess the Russian disease, I call it. But I think you want to be an American guy, and so these church restrictions, plus low pay. And he changed his name from Vasily to William, and here he is playing guitar, but I have a picture of him also still teaching Sunday school for the Tlingit kids. This is a very interesting picture. My new project is, as I said, on this Russian community in Sitka. There were, when the Russians left, they were mostly men who were Russian, full-blood Russians. But their Tlingit, their Creole, native or Creole wives, or common law wives, stayed behind in many cases. So in 1867, Sitka had a lot more women than men when the Americans came. And when the Americans arrived, there were mostly men who came here. They were single men. So there were marriages. And this is an example. This is Captain James Brightman. The Brightmans, there are several of them. They came to actually work in the factory, but they were they ran boats for the company. And he married Maria Chubarov, which is an important Sitka family. And they had a house, and I think that's his mother-in-law, and a baby. Some of you probably remember Louise Brightman. She worked in the library. That's her dad and her mom. But what happened is when they married Creole Russian women, the women generally stayed in the Russian church. So the kids were raised in the Russian church. They went to Sunday school. The men sometimes also joined, sometimes they didn't. But it was a very interesting community, and I'm learning more and more about it. I'm almost done. This is an example, I think, is of the kind of interaction, but then also separation of the white community and the Indian community. 4th of July, if I had a bigger picture, I think they're climbing something or playing something, but they're all whites. The Tlingits are sitting on a pile of wood and watching. I don't think they're excluding them, but they're certainly not sort of like, it's not a mixed company kind of thing. So that's, and that is not in any of the books. There are no accounts of 4th of July in Killiston. And then this is fascinating, Memorial Day. These are company buildings. One of them is a store, which was run by Joseph Zuboff. But what do we see? American flag and below a Russian flag. That's pretty good. I didn't know they allowed that. This is probably like 1900. So we're learning new things about that kind of mixed community. And then for people, I have colleagues who are very interested in Tlingit commercial fishing. So there are lots of boats, and then this is the company, gas boat or a bigger boat, and they're buying salmon. And there are about 5 or 6 pictures. You can actually document the entire process, buying salmon, lifting it, dumping it on the boat. And I think these pictures also belong in the book. I have a few pictures of Euro-Americans, and they're portraits. And at least this guy, Walter, said, oh, I remember, the name was given by Vincent or by Kinky, but Walter immediately said, oh, he was an old man, he lived a long time, I remember him. And he was one of the few people who stayed in Killiston all through the year because he had to watch the company property. So that's neat. This is a great picture. I think Vincent probably just was fascinated with this halibut. But here, in the workplace, there was mingling of races because there's a Tlingit man, there's a Asian, Chinese, Japanese, maybe Filipino, and then there was another Tlingit and 3 whites. So they're all working on this boat. I have some pictures of company, wood piles, herring, boats being repaired. This is a nice picture of a big boat, a big ship loaded with guano. City of Topeka, that's a boat that came from Seattle, brought tourists, mail, and then went on to Sitka. Now here again, they're coming from a hunting expedition, so this could have been leisure activity, or maybe they were hunting for meat for the company. I don't know. But at least one of them was a dandy-looking Tlingit young man with a hat and 3 white men. This is, we don't have time, but it's some interesting way of bringing fresh water because it's like a floating boat and inside there's like a water tank. And I wish I knew who these 2 ladies were and the kids, and then there's probably a Japanese man. There were several Japanese men living in Killisnoo, and 1 or 2 of them married Tlingit women. There was also a shipwreck off the coast of, a visiting Japanese ship that Father John wrote about. There was a farm. We know about Tom Baker's farm, and the Soboleff girls visited him. Another summer dwelling. Lots of pictures of the girls playing with cats, raising strawberries, fooling around. In one picture, they're dressed in kimonos because these Japanese men were treated well in the village, so they gave kimonos to the Soboleffs. And then these pictures, this is Vera on the left, and this is the Russian Creole girl, Nellie. And he had a certain artistic talent, I think. That's my favorite picture. I think it's great. A little bit of showing off. Vera standing on the dead whale dressed in her best. This is inside the house. We know they had a gramophone, lots of books, a dog, and then these girls. The mother really wanted them to marry properly, and they married 2 Irish fishermen. I think it was kind of below their station. And they had a piano. That's Vincent's when he became a businessman. He also ran, delivered mail. And this is a big store that he eventually built a house in a store in Angoon. And older people remembered it. He died in the 50s. And he had a movie theater. He showed movies there. He was respected. Frederica de Laguna, the anthropologist who did field work in the 50s, still talked to him right before he died. So we have a little bit of information. When people didn't pay their debts, he would post their names. And that worked well. Nobody wanted to be posted. And he was single for a long time, and then he married. Again, this is internet. Somehow, I forgot how, but I was Googling Soboleff, and then this woman from Maryland, Sarah Wise, apparently, he sent an ad in the 20s, pretty late, maybe even 30s. And she answered the ad, came up, and from the pictures, like on the left, looked like pretty cozy. And after he died in the 50s, she went back to Maryland. However, Frederica de Laguna's field notes say that the Tlingits didn't like her, that she was kind of mean. Where they liked Vincent, they didn't like her. And this is Vincent, the proud uncle, with his Vera's children. This is one of his last pictures. You can see he aged a bit. He was buried in the Evergreen Cemetery in Juneau by the Elks. Some very prominent Juneau people. He had a fair amount of money, and they'd go to Seattle with his wife, during the winter. But I think, thanks to Vincent, we have this beautiful collection. That's the story. We're going to go over 3. I figure if the clan leaders can go over, so can the lowly anthropologists.
Did you say those copies of those photographs out there could be purchased?
That's the boss.
These are just for exhibit, but these are.
I'm sorry, Steve.
They're all available online. They're easily had. Speak to me.
You can buy my book, and with keeping the costs down, there's a series of books on art and photography of the American West, and there's a Center for Art and Photography of the American West at the University of Oklahoma, and they gave us a grant, so we're trying to keep the cost down. So buy the book, don't wait for the movie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Henrikson from the Alaska State Museum, and I wanted to to shift gears here a little bit and show a few early views of Sitka. Most of these will predate photography by a bit, although there are several photographs of Sitka that date to the 1870s, 1880s that are quite interesting. But this is the earliest non-native depiction of Sitka that we know about, and Bill Holm uncovered this one. It's by an artist named Backstrom, who was here in 1793, and it shows the village of Sitka the way that the first Russians would have seen it, and other sea traders that came up here in the late 18th century. And the center mountain, let me see if I can get this pointer to work, right there, that's the Castle Hill, our new plain, with the Kicksadi houses on top. And here's a modern photo from about the same area. So Castle Hill, it's pretty hard to see it now, but that's right there behind those tanks. And I always thought it was interesting in the drawing because it has houses facing 90 degrees away from the way we might expect them to, based on what was there in the 19th century. And also, Backstrom did a sketch of this prior to doing the color version that shows a little bit more detail of that, with the houses facing 90. This is what we would now think of as Catlian Street along here, that you can clearly see a row of houses facing away from that, facing as if they were on this beach on the backside of Castle Hill. And it also clearly shows these kind of double posted memorial poles that also in the bottom engraving that was from the La Perouse expedition, showing some raised burials at the in Yakutat area, and so apparently they were using something similar in Sitka in those years. And again, this is the view from Castle Hill later on, showing that on this side of Castle Hill there were several beach fronts there that might have served as a beach where canoes could be safely landed, and so maybe there was a row of houses here at one point. I know underneath some of the buildings on Lincoln Street they have found artifacts, Tlingit artifacts, so possibly there was a row of houses along there at some point, and that would have been a fairly well-protected beach with, as you can see, small rocks and sand, so it wouldn't damage canoes when they were brought up there. So I think that's a possibility anyway, prior to the Russians coming in and setting up shop. And you can see here with this is the beachfront that those houses would have been facing right along in there, and that would be a nice area to land canoes. And quite a few of the villages have two beaches where canoes could be brought up in, depending on which ways the wind was going at the time. And so certainly along here was protected, but also along there as well. And this is a mid-20th century photograph prior to World War II, so it gives you a sense of how much of the land that we now walk on has been filled in over the years. And here's Castle Hill. That's filled way in all the way around now. We're sitting approximately right in this area, and that's all been filled in, and also quite a bit along Catleanne Street as well. And a lot of the houses were on pilings first, and then they filled in with rock underneath and eventually pushed that way out. Same thing with, you can see that Japansky Island in these days was a much smaller place than it is now, because all of these islands have been filled in between. And Merle Enlow told me that when they were filling a lot of that in during World War II, that they dynamited Japansky Island, and he was watching from a distance at the time, and it was like the whole island jumped up about 10 feet when the dynamite was set off, and it shattered the whole rock, and then they used that to push into and fill in between all those little islands, taking out a lot of smokehouses also. This is a really neat photograph that Robbie Littlefield put together, just showing all of the place names for all of these important places in and around Sitka. So this is what we think is going to be the earliest photograph of Sitka, although in 1867, when the transfer ceremony happened here, when the Americans officially took possession of Sitka, it seems likely that they would have had a photographer with them, and I've seen a reference to a photograph in our own collection from this transfer ceremony that was donated by Emmons to the library and museum, and Emmons' father was there at the time, but the photograph hasn't been located, so we're keeping our eyes open for that. Here's another really early image. Both of these are probably late 1870s, early 1880s, before the traditional style houses were torn down and replaced with the later ones. Voznesenski in the 1842, I believe, did some excellent sketches showing the 41, showing the wall between the Russians part of Sitka and the start of the village. The Russians pushed them down a ways, and these are the traditional style houses. And this excellent drawing of a kuik, or a funeral. I guess it's a funeral. The body is lying in state there with the boxes, Chinese chest, Chilkat robes. There's a tina there, and a row of dancers with yarn tassels hanging from their ears and staffs. So these are these are those two early photos lined up, showing you what the original village was configured like. There are a couple images of the interior of the houses. A lot of them were one terrace down. This one is a larger one apparently, and went down 2 levels to the lower level with the fireplace. A mixture of traditional implements and Euro-American furnishings. There's beds along the outermost platform. Here's another one. It looks like this is a traditionally styled house, but it's largely built with lumber from a sawmill rather than split planks. And the bottom photo shows the houses that replaced the traditional style ones. This would have been late 1800s, and a few of these are still with us today. That's a Photoshop, so that's probably 30s, 20s maybe. I'm not sure that this is Sitka, but it would have been similar to activity going on here when a house was being built, and the most dangerous part of the process was hoisting these beams, the main roof beams, up on top of those house posts.
Still is.
Still would be, yes. A lot of these, I've seen these photos in different libraries, and a lot of times they're said to be Sitka, and certainly some of the houses were of this style with the oval-shaped door in the middle, but there's another photo of this that I found recently that clearly shows it's the old village at Yakutat rather than Sitka. There's what that vicinity looks like today. Quite a bit has been filled in. This is probably 1890s or so with the more modern style houses, although these would have had the post and beam frame, and you can see these have smoke openings in the roof, so they're still using the traditional style fireplace, but the facade has store-bought door or manufactured doors and windows inserted into them. Here's, I believe Harold put this photo together, naming all of the houses along the waterfront. This is looking down towards Castle Hill, canoes on the beach. It's a much rockier shoreline, or was originally, and so not as optimal for landing canoes on, although there were areas where the boulders were cleared away. This is a painting by Leslie Jackson, 1901, showing that general area. Looking from the other direction, so that you can see there are some sandy patches in there. The canoes were kept covered to keep the wood from drying out and the hulls from splitting. This is an illustration that was in Liz Yansky's journal, early 1800s, showing Castle Hill with the Russian fortification built on it. And here's a drawing from that time period showing the fort. You can see they were starting already by that time filling in between some of these areas, and this is the heart of downtown Sitka now, Herring Rock, and where we're now, the Centennial Hall is about in this area. That was the remains of the castle in the late 1800s prior to it burning down. Incidentally, the Baronoff's Castle contained the first library, not the first, but the second library in Alaska, and two of the books from that library still exist, at least as far as we know, and that's in the State Library. They have the Russian America Company stamp on the binder. This is a famous early depiction of Sitka. Tikhonov did that about 10 years after the Battle of Sitka. Castle Hill in the background there, and this is Kotlian, the famous Kikseti chief. This is the Kikseti traditional site of their houses, and about I guess 120 years later, here's Kotlian shaking Harding's hand when Harding visited Sitka with Castle Hill in the background. It's pretty neat seeing the namesake of Kotlian shaking the president's hand there. So just several views of Castle Hill again. And just below Castle Hill was the site of the dig about 10 years ago, where quite a few Russian artifacts were found, including the Raven's Tail Road fragment. Here's a very rare photo of the Russian palisade and blockhouse that stood between the heart of downtown Sitka and the village, and the cannons were kept aimed in that general direction. And I think I'll end it here with this unique map of Sitka that's in the Sheldon Jackson Museum. We don't know the date of this, but from the buildings we can see that St. Michael's Cathedral was there, and this is the little causeway out to the island where the Paulson home is, Castle Hill, and this would be the scene of town is kind of wrapped around in a different way. Here's the village down here with the line of clan houses. There's the channel between Japonski and the main Baronoff Island filled with sailing vessels. So it's really a cool and unique depiction of this area. So I think I'll end it there. I appreciate you coming today, and we have another round of sessions starting in 15 minutes, so we better end it here. Oh, it's okay. That's all right. I know. Yeah.